Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we are continuing the B-side stories.
B-side.
Yeah. Not the west side, but the B-side.
Okay.
Yeah. But we are...
We're talking about the homies.
We are talking about the homies. There's homies on the B-side. Yeah. So we are continuing talking about the less known stories of the Bible. You listening to this might have been like, I know this story. And good for you, you know? Like let's just pretend we just high-fived or something, or like fist bump, or that we have some cool handshake or something.
Yeah.
But good for you.
Yeah.
Some people don't know.
Yeah.
So we're talking about it.
Right.
We're talking about Daniel and his homies. I was going to say David. Oh, man. Let me just warn you, people that listen to us, and thank you for listening to us. I have this thing where I'm going to talk about Daniel, but I might say David.
Yeah.
Now, please know, I mean Daniel. Yes, this whole episode is about Daniel and his homies. Yes.
And try to really drill that in.
Yes. It might still come out.
Today it's like interchangeable a little bit.
Exactly.
Just know that they're not. They're two different people. We know.
Yes.
That they're two different people.
Mm-hmm.
But for the sake of this episode, if you hear David, we
just
most likely mean Daniel.
Exactly.
So.
We're talking about Daniel and his homies. We're talking about the 4 Hebrew boys, and I'm sure that threw you off, but we're talking about Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You might also know these homies by their slave Babylonian names, which is the name King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to give them, which Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So having said that, all of those mouthfuls, here we go. So this story takes place in the book of Daniel, and to set the scene, we'll give you some Bible. So this is Daniel 1:1-6, and this is an NLT. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God, little G God. Then the king ordered Aspenaz, his chief of staff, to bring the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So that's how it all started. That's how it all began.
That's how they got there.
Yes,
right?
and it was the chief of staff that renamed them. Maybe Nebuchadnezzar told them to rename them or whatever, but it was let's correct ourselves. Yeah, it was the chief of staff. It was not King Neb.
Directly from him. But
yes, exactly.
Probably told by him since he's
exactly.
The king.
Like it was probably a practice that they had. So essentially, this is how they all got captured. I think that sometimes we tend to tell Daniel's story apart from the other 3 Hebrew boys because there's more stories about him. Of course, the book is about him and his gift is unique, but they all started in the same place, being captured at the same time and brought to the same palace. And as we see in these verses we just read, all 4 of the men were selected to work for the king and be in the royal service. As we see in the verses we just read, all 4 of the men were selected to work for the king and be in the royal service. And just for a little bit of history, the whole King Nebuchadnezzar situation with Babylon, I want to say that there was 3 different exiles, right? Like 3 different times that Babylonia came and captured Jerusalem, right? And there was like 3 different waves. And in one of the waves, they took these particular men because a different wave, it was Ezekiel, and there was like, just different times in history. But I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, so this was all during a time when the Israelites were being taken.
Yes.
And yeah, it was like different groups or different times, but basically they were just being taken over by
exactly, because they were, of course, there was a lot of people, so they were taking them like bit by bit. And God was allowing this. But I tried to find, because I ain't no theologian, you know what I'm saying? But I was trying to figure out what wave it was. And what I found was that it was the part of the first wave. But I could be wrong. There was 3. It was one of the 3.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I did read about how it was Ezekiel and what was the other one you mentioned? Like they all lived kind of around the same time.
Oh yeah. Like
Because
Ezekiel and Jeremiah, I think,
there you
were like contemporary, and I think they were second wave. I think. Yeah.
But like they lived around the same time.
Right.
So we hear these stories, and they might seem like they're far apart, but it's just because they were captured and were with a different group of people. But yeah, like they lived during the same kind of period.
Which is really cool to think about, because then it makes, which the Bible is, right, but it makes it like it makes it more cohesive. Yeah. So after we just talked about those Bible verses, and they were just captured, right? So what we're going to talk about now, we're going to talk about the special diet that we know and refer to as the quote unquote Daniel fast. So the Bible tells us in Daniel 1:8-15, but Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel, but he responded, "I am afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded." Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. "Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water," Daniel said. "At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see." The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. So great.
Yeah.
So yeah, for those of you that didn't know, this is where it comes from, right? Daniel refused to live like the Babylonians and eat like the Babylonians. The king and his minions had already tried to take their identity by changing their names, and now they wanted to change their diets. They wanted to rewire them, really, and turn them into Babylonians by force, and Daniel and the homies were not having it.
Right. It was just another way that the king wanted to kind of enforce his ways and have control over them. And Daniel was not about it.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I have a greater God, and we're going to do it this way.
Exactly, which is cool because it shows us that, of course, God gave him favor with this chief of staff person, as well as he knew that this whole training program was going to take 3 years. And he was like, oh no, we're about to lay down the ground rules right now because I'm not about to do this for 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And knowing that, like, if he followed the diet that they had, it would not benefit him, right? And he was like, I can't change how y'all treat me, or like changing my name, but I can honor God with what I'm gonna put into my body.
Yeah, exactly.
So
he's like, I may not have a lot of control, but I do control that.
Yeah. And to be able to know, like, hey, I trust God enough that you can test me, give us a time so I can prove to you that this is better. And God had his back.
Yeah, it's cool. Awesome. And it's also important to know for the people that didn't really know a lot about the story, like, as you see, it mentions Daniel and all the 3 other guys as well.
Daniel
so they're together this whole time. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Little small group they
had.
Yeah,
exactly. So we were just talking about how, King Neb wanted to change their identity, and they really wanted to kind of pummel them and make them Babylonians against their own will. And how do we know this, right? Like, how do we know that they were trying to change their godly identity to a Babylonian identity? Right. And we know this by the meaning of their names. So we're going to give you the definitions of their real names and then what they wanted to call them. So Daniel means God is my judge. And his new Babylonian name, Belteshazzar, means Baal protect the king. And we've talked about it before. Baal is a pagan god, right?
That's one of the small G.
Small G's, exactly. And we did a whole series on him, so you can go check that out.
Yeah, exactly.
Hananiah means God is gracious, and his new name, Shadrach, means command of Aku. And Aku is a Babylonian god of the moon. Right. Mishael means who is like God, and his new name, Meshach, means who is what Aku is. And again, Aku is the Babylonian god of the moon. So they're literally just like, it's like changing it word for word, but like it's gonna mean the same thing, but like it's gonna represent our gods instead of your god.
Like a different god, not yours.
Not yours, yeah. And then the last one, so Azariah means helped by God, And his new name, Abednego, means servant of Nebo. And Nebo is the Babylonian god of wisdom. So,
yeah, just trying to change the meaning of what God meant in their lives, and trying to be like, now you're going to serve our gods, or like have it represent our gods.
Yeah, which is interesting because they like kept the essence of the name, but they just changed like a slight detail, which is what just the devil does. He perverts slight detail, and it's like
it seems the same.
Exactly.
Not,
it still seems good. No,
it's still a god.
Yeah,
and it's like, but it's not the god.
That's crazy. I never noticed that before. Thank you, Holy Spirit. That was good. So in doing this, when we were just talking about changing their names, they were trying to destroy the identity their names gave them and how they were rooted in God. And now they were being associated with the Babylonian gods.
Right.
So now the end of Daniel 1 tells us that they began working in the royal service, and they also had God's favor on them. One particular gift that God had given Daniel specifically was to be able to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. So remember that, because that's going to be important
as we
in a couple of minutes. Yes, exactly. So fast forward, Daniel 1 verses 19 and 20 says, the king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. So at this point, they've completed the 3 year of training, and they're like, oh, they're awesome. I want them in my royal service.
And remember, like, they were captured with a bunch of people. Like,
yes.
It wasn't like them four. It was a whole group of people.
Yeah.
So they were really stood out from the whole, the whole group of people that they had captured.
Yeah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Which is awesome, right? Because it's God showing his mighty power through his people, which is what he does, all to glorify himself.
Right. So even though the king may not have seen that or recognized who God really was, God was showing himself through these men.
Exactly. Yeah. So now they're working for the king, a pagan king. These 4 men show us that we can be a part of the world, but we don't have to let the world change us. Right. To modernize this, these are basically 4 Christian men who do not work in ministry. They have secular jobs. The world is telling them what they should do and who they should be, and they're not budging at all. They know who they are, and they know who their God is. And although they are quote unquote slaves in exile, God is still with them. So they are literally the epitome of not conforming to the ways of this world.
So even though living in it and having to be surrounded by it, they didn't let that be who they really are. Right. And not let them change who they serve. Yeah. Which is awesome. Yeah. This is a great picture. Great.
Yeah, it's great. So now fast forward to Daniel 2, where it gets real dicey. So in Daniel 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. The Bible says that he had, quote, such disturbing dreams that he couldn't sleep. So he calls in his magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers, and he demanded that they tell him what he had dreamed. Tell me. So Daniel 2, 5 through 13 tells us, but the king said to the astrologers, I am serious about this. If you don't tell me what my dream was and what it means, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be turned into heaps of rubble. But if you tell me what I dreamed and what the dream means, I will give you many wonderful gifts and honors. Just tell me the dream and what it means. They said again, please, your majesty, tell us the dream, and we will tell you what it means. The king replied, I know what you're doing. You're stalling for time because you know I am serious when I say, if you don't tell me the dream, you are doomed. So you have conspired to tell me lies, hoping I will change my mind. But tell me the dream, and then I'll know that you can tell me what it means. The astrologers replied to the king, no one on earth can tell the king his dream. And no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or astrologer. The king's demand is impossible. No one except the gods can tell you your dream, and they do not live here among people. The king was furious when he heard this, and he ordered that all the wise men of Babylon be executed. And because of the king's decree, men were sent to find and kill Daniel and his friends. So these men, they can't tell the king his dream because the king, which is kind of smart move, right?
Yeah. He didn't tell them what the dream was.
Right.
He had a dream.
Yeah.
But he wants them to tell him, like, hey, what did I dream? And then what does it mean?
Exactly. Like, if you're so powerful, tell me what it was.
You can figure it out.
Because I don't want to tell you, and then you lie to me or whatever.
Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if you can tell me what I dreamed and then tell me what it means, then I'll believe you.
Yes.
So I'm not going to tell you what it was, but you have to guess it.
Yeah. And all of these guys are like,
that's impossible.
That's not not how this works.
Yeah. Like, you have to tell us something because, like, that's not how we work. And basically, like, saying, like, we're not powerful enough. And the gods that they believed in were like, well, maybe they could, but
they don't live here.
Yeah. So,
exactly. So these men can't tell the king his dream so that they can interpret it, right? So they really don't have anything that they can do. And somehow Daniel and the homies' lives are in the balance because of this whole fiasco.
Yeah.
Like, they can't tell the king his dream, but somehow, like, everyone's gonna die now because of it. Which is, it made me think of, like, when we were talking about these, like, sorcerers and all these people, magicians and whatever. That's like opening the door to the enemy, right? Like, if you give the enemy an inch, he'll take a whole mile.
Right.
And so it's similar to these people where it was like, because you test things and you test them by the Spirit. So in this case, it was just a smart move, and like, you tell me first.
You tell me, and then I'll tell you if it's true, and then I'll believe the interpretation of it or the answer to it or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I also think, like, he included Daniel and the rest of the guys because
as wise men. Yeah, that's why it was like, that's why they were going to die.
He's a pagan king, and he doesn't understand, like, the power of the true God.
Right.
He's used to having so many other gods, and each of them do something different. And so now he's here, and he goes, oh, he sees something in them, but he doesn't understand that it's not like all these others. Right. It's not like an astrologer. It's not like a magician. But
so he just calls them wise men. He just pissed
at all of them. So he's like, well, you're wise men too, and I consider these other guys wise men, so all of y'all are gonna suffer for the same thing.
Exactly. And this is something, you get this one for free because this wasn't planned. But this was something that I learned recently, that when in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, it comes up a lot when they say the true living God, right? These are the words of the living God, and they describe God as a living God. The reason that they said living God was because at that time there were so many other pagan little g gods that they had to distinguish the true God from the fake gods. So they would say the living God because the other ones are not alive.
Because if they just said God, then anyone could interpret based on their beliefs or their culture or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah. So I learned that the other day. I was like, oh, that's an interesting distinction. That's why they did that.
And let's capitalize that and why that was important.
Exactly. Exactly.
The Lord God, and
Yeah. So the armies of the living God, that's where you hear it a lot, where they say the armies of the living God. Because I was like, man, there's something that they say. Anyway, we're back to the regular schedule programming. I just wanted to say that because I learned that the other day. So the chief of staff person, Arioch, he comes to kill the Hebrew boys because of the king's decree, right? Because he said, kill all the wise men. And apparently these 4 Hebrew boys are part of those wise men. So Daniel 2:14-19 says, when Arioch, oh, this is not the chief staff. This is the commander of the king's guard. So when Arioch...
There's a lot of people.
Yeah. So when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, came to kill them, Daniel handled the situation with wisdom and discretion. He asked Arioch, why has the king issued such a harsh decree? So Arioch told him all that had happened. Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time to tell the king what the dream meant. Then Daniel went home and told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah what had happened. He urged them to ask the God of heaven to show them his mercy by telling them the secret so they would not be executed along with the other wise men of Babylon. That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. Right. That's huge.
That is, that's super important, and just gives us
a massive detail.
That understanding of how important that really is.
Yes.
For us as well, right? So this part's really cool because we see, like, Daniel had this problem, right? Like, hey, we're about to die or really suffer.
Yeah.
And he spoke, right, with his friends, his community, and asked them to come into agreement with him in prayer. And that's how God was able to reveal to him the secret that the king had about.
Yeah, it's huge. So the fact that Daniel said, we can pray about this and God will tell us. Let me tell my friends. They'll come in agreement with me. They'll help me pray. And then, of course, the power of prayer. And just having people pray with you. It's just like, just the faith that they all had of like,
coming together.
He's going to tell us.
One thing,
so good.
And trusting that God was going to reveal. And he did.
Yeah.
So